Perfect, great. So the focus of the work that I'm presenting today is really to try and work out, does cybersecurity rules and legislation actually make us safer online? The areas that I'll be going through is firstly an overview of what is cybersecurity and who is us. In order to do an analysis of this, I've had to build a reasonably simple framework through which we can view the various pieces of legislation and then do an analysis to see, is this going to have a direct impact, an indirect impact? Is this something at a nation state level, or is it going to affect the ordinary average user of a PC? I'll be going today through some of the results from the EU. The plan for the paper is it will look also at the States, which work has begun but isn't ready yet for presentation, Africa and Asia as well. But the step that's actually ready for presentation really is a first pass of the EU. And then it'll be going through a quick summary of what the next steps are. And then hopefully there are some interesting, nice and friendly questions at the end of it. The crux of this matter is, what is cybersecurity? I use a term by Minsky, which is a suitcase word. And a suitcase word is something which it has to be unpacked to fully understand what it means. But at first pass, you think you have a meaning, but it's actually not that tangible. It's quite vague. Cybersecurity is definitely one of these words, because when it's referenced, it could be policy, it can be the practice, it can be at a network level, an individual level, it can be people's training. It's often quite tricky when you stack up papers next to each other and you try to do an analysis to see what are they actually referring to. And so this is the first problem, is how do we define this in a way that works? And how do we create this framework that allows us to take papers which are focused on various aspects of the subject and take legal bills which are again focused on various aspects of it, and do a side-by-side analysis. Her and Friedman say it really well. I mean, it's a term which is often abused, it's very, very true, and much misused because it's not really that well understood. From the technical side, it is quite well understood, but from a non-practitioner basis, I've seen it refer to military operations, I've seen it refer to cyber war, to antivirus. It's basically put in if somebody wants to tick the box and kind of create a sense that we're dealing with this, but it's often very, very vague on the actual detail of what it is. When we look at where it came from, the original definition of the subject was really the actions which were taken to maintain three things. The first is the confidentiality of a system. And confidentiality is, I can't get access to the data in it. Data in this sense could be the program, could be the operating system, could be personal information. It's quite broad, but it's essentially access to the system itself. Integrity is, if the confidentiality is breached, I still have ways and means to prevent someone coming from changing that data in the system. So the data that was put in stays the same until it's changed by the rightful owner, so to speak. So you can see how it's linked, that the first step is keep people out. That's confidentiality. The second step is, okay, they've gotten in. How do we restrict the actual damage and limit what the negative outcomes are? That's under integrity. Availability is a little bit different. It means that I can continue, so I as a user of the system can continue to get access to it. It's one step removed from confidentiality and integrity, because I can block someone from accessing a system without compromising that system. I'm essentially blocking the path to the system. So it's a little bit of a different subject, but these three kind of elements, which are known as the CIA triad, are the basis of cybersecurity. And in my framework, we return to this, and this is what the term is going to mean. We use other terms if we're talking about other matters. The problem is when we create the framework, this is basically what the outcome at best is going to be. And it's sad to say that at the start of a paper, saying if this paper works, if it's accepted by people in the industry, all it's going to do is lead to more confusion. And there's a more fundamental problem which needs to be kind of resolved. And this is really because when it comes to this topic, there is no single regulator. There is no single source of the truth. You've got issues with multiple jurisdictions. You don't have anyone out there saying we are the standard bearer for cybersecurity. And until we get to that point, which will also require minimum standards which are globally accepted, this is unfortunately where we're going to be. I'm just hoping that my paper actually becomes the good 15th standard if it actually gets there in the end. The framework itself is quite simple, and it's really based on 4 pillars. The first, as I mentioned, is cybersecurity, and this is really at the user level. So the machines that you're using to view this presentation, your laptops, your computers, your tablets, your phones. Cybersecurity really is the actions taken to protect them. This could be antivirus, it could be good kind of user behavior, but it's essentially saying that that is actions which are focused at the protection of the kind of device. I then go up a level and I call it cyber health. And the reason why I chose cyber health is a concept which applies, in my view, very well to the subject. And it unpacks better than the term cybersecurity, because that's kind of binary. You have security or you don't. Like, I've taken cybersecurity actions and therefore I'm good. Whereas health is something which you have to manage, you have to maintain, it's continuous. And also, and this is critical to understand, there are people out there who take very good care of their health. They eat healthily, they don't drink too much, they keep their weight down, they exercise very well, and they can still get sick. Yet there's other people out there who smoke, who drink, who don't exercise, who live very unhealthy lifestyles, and they actually end up not getting sick for a long time or live a long, essentially unhealthy life. And this is a good illustration of how companies and how networks and how states view the subject of cybersecurity, because I can take all the right precautions and I can still be hacked through no fault of my own. I can take no precautions and I won't be. And also, health is, it's easy to assess. You've good health, you've bad health. I'm working on my health to improve it. This is where a large amount of the kind of rules are basically assessed through, because this is what it's referring to. It's the overall system. It's not one set of particular actions. It's the overall view of the security actions of the company or the nation state. The last 2 refer to military operations. It's clear now that there are teams in most states. There's basically one set of teams whose job it is to break into other nation states, to steal information, to damage nuclear frameworks, as was done to Iran, and to basically like support their power on a multinational level. And on the flip side, you've got teams who are trying to stop this. We need to carve these out of the subject. These are valid. I'm not questioning that it should or shouldn't be done. That's a different conversation. And there's an awful lot of literature with regard to cyber war. But this cannot be wrapped up in the concept of kind of security, because if I'm a nation state and I've compromised Microsoft Windows, I'm going to sit on that. I'm not going to lead to the protection of like other users, either in my own borders or outside of them. So they're valid areas to look at. There's a lot of legislation around it, actually, less so in Europe, more so in Asia and Africa. But it can't be viewed through the same framework as actions taken to protect people. So that's a quick summary of the framework. And from there, we jump straight into the EU. So when I say positive legislation here, I'm not meaning positive in terms of the good. I mean positive in that it actually relates to the subject. Really, the current cornerstone of where we're at with regards to it in the EU is the Cybersecurity Act of 2019. This did two things. It gave the ECONICIA, which is the European Cybersecurity Agency, a permanent mandate. Up until now, it had been a rolling temporary mandate with different with different objectives. That's now set on a permanent basis. They're now based in Crete. It also created the possibility to create a framework for cybersecurity so we can potentially certify them as good or as bad. Both of these are positive. I mean, these are definitely good acts that should be done and are most definitely welcome. But are they going to have any impact in the short term on a person's device? Are they going to lift the level of cybersecurity for a user? In all honesty, probably not. The framework might, and in 5 or 6 years' time, we can look back on it and see where it's gone. Another crucial piece of legislation is the Network and Information kind of Security Directive, which was introduced in 2016. And this again is a good thing. It mandates that nation states have to identify their critical infrastructure. It has to identify risks which people could go after. You're talking power networks, broadband networks, that type of large critical risk. And it also creates a CSIRT, which is a Computer Security Incident Response Team, which has to be created for every member state. And these can, under the legislation, coordinate and share information. But again, if we look at it through the frame, I mean, so like overall, this is good. It's positive. It's moving it in the right direction. But when you look at it in detail, yes, it probably has lowered the chance that a person's power grid is going to fail. But the companies were looking after that anyway. But that's probably its only real impact on your average end user. What's interesting is ECONICIA was around when this was out, but it is not given a mandate to interact with the CSIRTs, to interact with the member states to see, are the precautions that they're taking good? Are they following best practice? It's up to each state to basically say what they want to do, and it's like left at that, which in my view is a missed opportunity. Botnet directive is important. The reason being is because botnets over the last 5 to 10 years have really been focusing on smart products. So these aren't really your laptops and your computers. These are your smart kettles, your smart thermostats. And what's important is the user doesn't really interact with the operating system. It isn't like a computer with a keyboard. You have to access it usually through another device. So it would make sense, given that botnets are growing through very shoddy practices in this industry with default username and passwords and like default gates left open, that this could have been looked at. There could have been some minimum standards of cybersecurity. It's been done in the UK. There's an act that's been coming out in California where governments have begun to implement this. But for the EU, it was a missed opportunity. And finally, everyone's favorite GDPR, it does specify companies have to take positive cybersecurity measures when looking after data, but it doesn't specify what they are. It's up to the companies to just do it. There is no minimum standards. There's no reference points for that. On the flip side, there's a bunch of what I would call missing legislation. So we have the Consumer Protection Directive of 2019, which draws very heavily from the Digital Service Directive, also of 2019. And this is really to do with the digital single market. The EU has been going on about this. There's a lot of policy papers. There's a lot of papers from the kind of Commission. It's completely silent when it comes to cybersecurity. So we have a digital services, on the Consumer Protection Directive. If I buy a smart device or a mobile phone and it breaks because a chip fails or a physical problem, I can take it back. If it's insecure because of shoddy programming, because of, clearly this is just not the way it should be done by any objective sense, there is absolutely nothing I can do about that. I can't even take them to court. There is no mechanism for that. And it's clear that the EU has looked at this. There's many directives which have quite good, many kind of regulations which have quite good technical directives. They're usually niche. The tachograph directive spells out in excruciating detail in the annexes how the cybersecurity needs to apply to devices to read tachographs. So the EU is clearly capable of doing it. It's founded a body that's well able to understand this, but it's stepping away from consumer kind of cybersecurity. Partly the reason for this is there is no cybersecurity mandate in the EU. It's drawn from Article 114 of the already of the functioning of the European Union, which is the kind of catch-all internal market cohesion directive. So it's possible that the lack of a specific mandate is driving this, or it's just they just don't think it's going to get through. There are like too many kind of nation states in the EU, or sorry, member states, and they're not going to get a consensus on this. But overall, my assessment really comes down to actually, sorry, I've put those slides in the wrong order. It's a scaffold. There's good framework there. There's references to cybersecurity. There's references to if it's an EU body. I was actually reading essentially the actual lighthouse regulation for the coordination of lighthouses around the EU. There's good cybersecurity references in there. They have to protect the data. It is specified out. They must do something, but the something isn't created yet. So that framework is beginning to show up. It is appearing in the last few years. We can see that there's been a number of references to cybersecurity, which is EU speak for policy, and then for confidentiality and integrity, which is actual cybersecurity actions. These are really over the last 3 or 4 years is actually where these references are there. There's a few from early on and from the early from the early directives and regulations, but most of these are from 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019 onwards. So we can see that there's definitely action's been taken, but what that house is going to look like on the other side of the scaffold, we don't know yet. That's not clear. And it's very clear that there's positive skips, that they are basically choosing to ignore this subject. They are dancing around it, stepping over it. And until they come to terms with that, it would be my view that EU doesn't really make it that safer to browse the internet, to use computers. They have a bunch of legislations, they talk about it a lot. There's a huge amount of policy papers, but the actual impact as of today on your computer, on your phone, on your tablet is pretty slim. Next steps, this was really just the first pass. There's a bunch more work on the EU needs to be done. There's some quantitative analysis I'm in the process of doing. Hasn't been finished yet, so I haven't presented it. And then it's looking at the States, looking at Africa,